I don't have a lot of preacher friends. Never enjoyed preachers all that much. I like lay people a lot more. I'm not just buttering you up. But I have one preacher friend I like a lot. David Emery is a pretty prominent pastor now in Kentucky, outside Louisville. But when I met him, he was at a tiny church in Little Rock, Arkansas, and he was fresh out of TCU. He was a goober of the first order. And he had had a hard week. We were playing golf, and he is so bad, I am better at golf than he, then and now. But he had had a very hard week. A woman came to him and said, "You put together a new hymnal committee, and you didn't put me on it. I'm quitting this church. I'm never coming back." Another woman says, "You invited me to come to this church, and you said I could dress casual, and I did, and all the other women were wearing dresses. I'm never coming back." And David said, "I'm not going to be nice to anybody today unless I'm paid to." And I said, "David, you are." And so it goes. He's a nice guy. He's a good pastor. He had a frustrating day, and he didn't respond to it as he would have on other days. Do you ever have days like that? Days when you don't rise to your own high standards? I do. Everybody else in the room does, if you don't. So, understanding that, you might understand a little bit of what was going on with Elijah. Is this on loud enough? Elijah was already a rock star in Israel by the time of the lesson that we read today. Elijah was the most popular, most powerful, strongest prophet at a time when there were thousands of prophets in Israel. He spoke directly to King Ahab. He spoke the truth to power, which is always dangerous business. And Ahab was evermore one more piece of work. If you read 1 Kings, you read about one king, and it concludes with, "And he was the worst one they ever had." And then the next king, "Never had Israel had such a bad king." And then it comes to Ahab, and "Never had there been such a bad king as he." And they weren't kidding. He was bad. They were a long way. They were 100 years or more from Solomon and David and Saul, the good kings. And it was getting worse successively. Ahab had shown some pretty decent political instincts if you overlook the fact that he was a Hebrew and he was the king of Israel, and they had a jealous God who had some pretty strict rules about how life was going to be lived in his world. Ahab had married a foreigner. To the west of Israel was a smaller but far more powerful country, Phoenicia. And there had been an arranged marriage, and he was married to the princess Jezebel. Now, you just know that's not going to go good. Her name is famous for not going good. And Jezebel, I want to be her defender. She didn't ask to marry Ahab. She didn't ask to be moved out of her own country. She did not ask to go to a country that worshiped a God named Yahweh. She was happy in the land of the Philistines worshiping Baal. She was dedicated to Baal. If you were going to be her defender on this, she was sincere about it. She was earnest. She was dedicated to the worship of Baal. And so, being stuck in another country, she did what we might do. She showed a little bit of evangelical fervor, and she tried to import her God into that new country. And in her mind, they'll be better off. They'll get to know a better God. They'll worship a better God. The country will be much richer. After all, Baal was a god of rain and all kinds of weather. Fertility if you were good and sterility if you weren't. Baal was a potent character in their world. And she meant for that country to worship Baal. So she imported hundreds of priests. And they set up places of worship throughout the country. And the worship of the God of Israel was fading. Now, you and I know we are hip to this important thing. The God that the people of Israel was worshiping is the God of heaven and earth, the only God that is God. And Baal was one more idol, one more grand waste of time. And perhaps Elijah knew that, but they did not. And so the worship of Baal was growing. God speaks to Elijah, and Elijah speaks to King Ahab, and he says to Ahab, there's going to be a drought. The rain's going to stop. There won't be dew in the morning. There is going to be no more moisture. It's going to be as dry here as Altus, Oklahoma in August. You're going to have a drought. And they had it for 3 years. And things became desperate for them. When they got good and desperate, Elijah comes back to Ahab and says, what do you think? Shall we have a contest? You bring in all of Queen Jezebel's priests, all these priests to Baal, and they can have a prayer-a-thon. They can go after it, tag team praying. They can pray for rain and pray for rain as long as they need to. And they prayed for a good long time. Not a drop. Not a drop. And then Elijah prays for rain to his God. A deluge. It comes. The drought is over. The rivers are full. The streets are washed clean. Evidence to those who need it that there is a God who hears you, can serve you, can look out for you, who cares for you. And you can spin your wheels on other things. Now, in a more up-to-date 21st century Bible, or even in a first century Bible, a New Testament sort of Bible, maybe that's where the story would end. But this is an Old Testament story, and it gets acting real Old Testament real quick right here. Because what does the great Elijah do? He wipes out, he kills all those priests of Baal. Now that's grim and that's tragic. But that's the story. And so it shouldn't be a vast surprise to us that Jezebel takes exception to this, and getting the word of what has happened, she sends a message to Elijah. You're going to get what you gave. I'm going to make sure you get what you gave, and you're going to die as miserable a death as they did, or I will try him. Elijah has stood up to Ahab. He has persevered as a giant of faith through a lot of circumstances, demonstrated faith and loyalty. But the word that Jezebel is going to get him scares him to death. And he runs like a chicken. He runs until he runs out of the country. He runs to Judah, which is now another kingdom. And he tells God, I'm just ready to die. And God says, what's going on with you? He says, Jezebel's going to kill me. And I've been faithful to you. I'm the only one left being faithful to you. That's called an overstatement. I'm the only one who's been faithful to you. And now I'm no better than my ancestors, primitive as they were. It's just as good that I die. Before Marty Robbins ever sang about the streets of El Paso, he had a hit song. Well, I never felt more like singing the blues, 'cause I never thought that I'd ever lose your love. Well, I never felt more like running away, but why should I go? 'Cause I couldn't stay without you. You got me singing the blues. The moon and stars no longer shine. The dreams are gone I thought were mine. Enough. Aren't you glad I didn't sing that? That is a poor, pitiful me song. And that's the song Elijah was singing. Poor, pitiful me. God gives him bread, gives him water, sends him on his way. He backtracks the whole trip that Moses had taken with the people of Israel to their land when they came out of Egypt. He backtracks that and takes him to Mount Horeb, it's called in this story. But we know Mount Horeb as Mount Sinai, the place where the law was given, where God appeared to Moses. And God appears to Elijah. "1,100 years before Elijah, there was Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham and Sarah were also giants of faith. And God had promised to make of them a great nation. And almost universally, Abraham was trusting in his God. But he caved in. He gave up on the idea that he would have this great nation with Sarai, so he has a child by a servant woman. God is not pleased. And God has to orchestrate ways around this whole mess that Abraham has created. Time would pass. Moses would arise on the scene. Moses was drafted into his service to God. He didn't want it, but he was good at it. He was dedicated to it. He had anger management problems. And so coming down from that same mountain when given the law, he sees these useless Hebrew people have created a golden calf, and he loses his temper and he shatters the new covenant that God has made with these people. Has to go all the way back up that mountain, get a new copy, and God is not pleased. David would come along, and my goodness, David would set the standard on what a king ought to be for centuries to come. But he acted like a guy, and he had his failures. And God was disappointed in him. And so now, Elijah has disappointed God. There appears to him this miraculous experience, a pretty incredible experience. First, up on that mountain, he experiences hurricane force winds. Wind that blew and blew and blew. Earthquakes. And then fire. All of these were supposedly understood to be signs of the workings of Baal. They didn't change Elijah's life. They didn't inform him. They didn't comfort him. They didn't do much of nothing for him. But then, some Hebrew scholars would say there was a light breeze. A light breeze. A still calm. And in that still calm, Elijah experienced God. And Elijah experienced something incredible about God, earlier experienced by Abraham and Moses and David. Whatever their lapses in faith, in courage, in patience, in good sense, their God does not write them off. Their God does not dispose of them. Our God continues to have faith in them and to use them and to love them. Now, these characters are called giants of the faith. I'm not. Are you? If they could fail God, is it any wonder that throughout our lives, we do, but throughout our lives we have a God who doesn't give up on us. There's a hymn we sing. Let sense be dumb, let flesh retire. Breathe through the earthquake, wind and fire, O still small voice of calm. Let us pray. Gracious God, may we be open to you when you are near us. May we experience you as we do in the least predictable, oddest of ways. May we celebrate your goodness. And may we every day represent a renewal of commitment to you.